Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Missing Frames. This is the podcast where we watch all the movies we should have seen by this point in our lives. I'm your host, Shawn Eastridge. We're hanging out on the Nerd Party Network, a collection of podcasts dedicated to all things entertainment. Check it out at thenerdparty.com and make sure you're following us on social media. You can follow us on Instagram. It's just the Nerd Party. You can follow us on Twitter at Join Nerd Party, and you can like the Facebook page as well. And I am welcoming back as my guest host today, my lovely wife, Sarah Eastridge. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks.
I think I say lovely to describe every one of my guests, and that's why I had like a moment of my brain was on the fritz, and I was repeating myself over and over because it was occurring to me like I think every guest I have is lovely.
So I'm just like the others.
Well, that's why I was trying to think of something else, and I couldn't. I am only capable of doing so
lovely.
much.
That's okay.
You can only demand so much from me as a podcast host, as a human being, as a husband, as anything. I try so hard and got so far, and in the end, it didn't even matter.
Wow.
Thank you, Lincoln Park. Speaking of Lincoln Park, or something that has nothing to do with Lincoln Park at all, we're going to be watching a film.
Yeah.
Believe it or not.
Yeah.
And
all about Lincoln Park.
What is the film, Sarah? Do you remember?
City Lights.
City Lights, Charlie Chaplin's City Lights. Some would say Charlie Chaplin's best film. Many would say one of the greatest films ever made. And it's a film that Sarah has never seen before.
It's quite a bar.
It's a film that I've only just seen recently. In fact, Charlie Chaplin is a recent discovery for me. Not that I've just discovered who he is, but watching his films, I've never really seen any of his movies. Have you seen any Charlie Chaplin films?
Not a one.
No.
I've seen clips. You
Yeah.
know, I'm familiar. I know who Charlie Chaplin is, but I've never sat down and watched any of his films.
And I hadn't either. I think a couple years ago, just on a whim, maybe it was like 2019 or something, I decided to watch The Kid, which was the first movie he, I think, wrote and directed himself. City Lights, he directs. By that point in his career, I think he was only doing his own films.
Okay.
He was directing his own films. I can't say for sure, but I'm pretty sure. He was a star by that point, but that was, huge. So he was obviously extremely popular, and there was some unprecedented deal that I don't remember which film company did with him, but they gave him insane creative control, freedom, tons of money, and he was just massive. So City Lights, I think, was the fifth film. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, the fifth film he did. The Kid was the first. The Kid was also the first film of Charlie Chaplin's that I'd seen at all. I'd seen clips from The Gold Rush, but I hadn't watched it all the way through. But The Kid, it's like an hour long, and it's really sweet. And I think what struck me, it's 1921. It felt... obviously it's silent, so it only could feel so contemporary as a black and white silent film. But I think the humor felt contemporary. Like it didn't feel, other than the disconnect of like I'm watching a silent movie, it felt very like modern in terms of the sense of humor, the comedy, but also the storytelling just felt very straightforward, clear. And I think a lot of times when you're watching older films, you kind of have to say, okay, well, for the time, this was funny or this was clever, but it was very clear that Charlie Chaplin, it was like, oh, no wonder he's so beloved, no wonder he was so famous, and no wonder his influence spreads so far and wide, because he really is brilliant and sincerely very funny. And you've sat by me as I've watched with my headphones on, or you've not paid attention, but you've heard me laughing out loud at these movies, which is not something I typically do for...
You're pretty conservative with your laughter. Like something has to really make you laugh.
Yes.
Sure.
I can fake laugh on a whim.
But if I hear hyena laughing,
yes,
that
hyena
is
laughter,
like...
which I'm sure our listeners are familiar with if they've listened to any episode. But as far as an older film, Like definitely. Like I definitely feel like there's a disconnect. I feel I'm kind of like, yeah, it's funny. I get it. That's a chuckle maybe, but there have been some actual genuine laughs from
some guffaws.
Me for Charlie Chaplin. So City Lights was one I only saw recently as I've been kind of going through his films and learning more about him. And City Lights might be my favorite. So I've seen The Kid, The Gold Rush, City Lights, Modern Times, The Great Dictator, which may also be my favorite. And I'm in the midst of watching Monsieur Verdot, which is the film he did after The Great Dictator. I think it's toss up between City Lights and Great Dictator.
So most of those are speaking films, right?
No, Great Dictator and Monsieur Verdot are the only ones.
Oh,
and
okay.
well, what's funny is by this point, so this was 1931 when City Lights came out, and by that point, talkies, sound pictures were a thing, and they were a few years into their existence. So by this point, it was really rebellious and against the norm to do a silent film.
Oh, wow.
And so there was almost a sense of Chaplin being nervous because he wasn't sure how it was going to do. Like he thought there was a very strong potential that people were going to reject it. And there was like a preview of the film where the audience had kind of a lukewarm reaction that he thought reinforced like, oh my gosh, it's the end of an era. I can't do these anymore. And
did he just want to do it?
Yeah.
Just
like
his
he was
medium
like,
of
no,
choice?
like it was what he was familiar with, but it was also defiantly like he felt like what movies should be. So he's like, no, I'm going to make a silent movie in the midst of all this. And maybe he was scared.
Yeah.
What I learned from The Great Dictator later on is that like that film is so confident and fantastic with sound. It's his first sound film that it's actually kind of shocking to me how good it is considering his clear reluctance to go into that area. But City Lights is, it's a wonderful film. It's a beloved classic. It's considered by many to be one of the greatest films ever made, and lots of people rank it highly, if not at number one for their Charlie Chaplin rankings. So how do you feel?
I'm excited.
Yeah.
I'm it's one of those things I'm kind of surprised. I'm in my mid-30s and I've never seen a Charlie Chaplin
you are
film.
more likely to see his films than I know I'm the film snob, but like you've seen a lot more black and white classic, like old films that are just a little bit more obscure, not that Chaplin's obscure.
There wasn't most of that came from my parents and what they loved, and I just don't remember. I'm gonna have to ask them, but I don't remember ever really seeing any Charlie Chaplin movies. But he is so iconic that you know who he is.
Well, you know what he looks like, obviously.
Yeah,
now, are there any? Can you think of any scenarios, like things that he'd done, or like?
Well, the speech from The Great Dictator is like I had seen that clip many times.
I don't know what it was, but I'd always wanted to avoid watching that.
Well, in any time of war. In modern history, that
social strife,
that
like
starts
controversy
circulating.
That comes around again, and I've wanted to watch it,
it's
but I'm like,
nice you're able to avoid it.
Yeah, I was like, I want to watch it in the context of the film. I'm sure it's great. It's many people think it's great. So, but I finally got to see it all the way through for the first time.
And then his mime stuff, doesn't he mime?
I mean, he's a silent.
Well, yeah, but I feel like he did like a mime scene in something that I don't. Maybe I'm totally wrong.
I mean, maybe he did.
That's in my brain. That's what I'm thinking.
And it's worse that I can't remember because I've seen a few.
Well, one of us is right and one of us is wrong.
Are you familiar with him doing the little potato dance?
No.
Like with the forks? Like
No.
just doing that? I feel like if you saw that, you would.
I wish everyone could see what
recognize
Shawn
it.
is doing right
you
now.
could see what I'm doing. I grabbed a couple of potatoes and I'm dancing. But
I'm really unfamiliar. Beside like who he is as a film and a cultural icon, I'm unfamiliar with him in general.
with his work.
Yeah.
Do you want to take a stab at what you think this movie's about?
I have not a clue. I mean,
Yes.
it's a city with lights in
Yes,
it. I don't know.
for sure.
I have zero frame of reference. What type of character is he?
He's the Tramp. The Tramp is the character that made him famous. Just the guy who waddles around in his little top hat and his suit.
And this is silent or not?
This is silent, but this was made in like the era of like sound films exist by this point.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Gotcha.
it's an act of defiance.
I don't know.
Anything.
He is it romantic?
Yeah.
Okay. Then he falls in love.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know.
Okay.
I got nothing.
He
I
falls in
can't.
love.
I can't even.
City Lights is about a man who's a tramp and falls in love
In a city.
in a city with lights.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe is he an actor? Is he like a stage actor? Maybe.
I don't know. We'll have to find out.
So usually I have an inkling, and I've
I
no
don't
clue.
think you know anything.
No.
And to be fair, I think like maybe Chaplin's films, because they all kind of fall into that slapstick comedic
Yeah.
area, they all resemble each other in a way. Like they are not like interchangeable, but for sure, like there are antics that could be almost in any one of them. Some antics, not all of them, but yeah. Very
I'm excited.
Excited to see what you think.
Yeah, me too.
So let's go watch it.
All right.
Now available to own on video cassette.
And we're back. Sarah, how did you feel about City Lights? You didn't even let me finish the
I'm
question.
sorry,
You love it so
I'm
much.
sorry.
You were about to say, I
loathed it. I loathed it. No, I loved it. It was really good. And as soon as we finished, I was just mad that I hadn't seen any Charlie Chaplin movies. Like, what have I been doing my whole life? I want to go back and watch all of them. And it was really beautiful. And I really, 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 really loved it.
So you would say Chaplin lives up to the legend.
Yeah, for sure.
And this is now, you've seen a Chaplin movie, City Lights, which,
Yeah.
I mean, I think maybe not by unanimous vote, but many, many people, including Charlie Chaplin himself, think this is his best film. I think Stanley Kubrick said this is his favorite film. Tarkovsky said this is his favorite film. There are a ton of filmmakers who say, like, not only that it's their favorite Chaplin movie, but that it's their favorite movie ever. And does that ring true to you? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I can see why. I wouldn't say it's my favorite movie ever. Although I couldn't even tell you what my favorite movie ever is. So maybe
it is.
This does not apply
maybe
to me.
It is.
But yeah, cinematically, like I can see how it was a huge achievement, and it's really beautiful and sweet. It's very sincere.
Yes.
Very sincere. But then you have the great humor, and he's such a physical, like I didn't realize how much physical comedy I guess he did, which obviously it shows you I know nothing. I was like, oh, he's like a mime. Like I just didn't really.
Which technically he kind of is.
But I guess I didn't realize that this character he plays in multiple films is what was in my brain of like, oh, doesn't he do mime stuff? But I was thinking of this character, the Tramp. I just had no idea that's what it was called or what I just didn't like tether the two thoughts together. But yeah, it was really good.
And you were very amazed by his shuffle, his little shuffle.
Yeah, I was like, how can he walk like that? What's happening? Why are his feet in two different directions?
His physicality is
crazy.
insane.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
Like, was he trained in acrobatics? Like, what the heck is his
I don't know
background?
enough about him to say for sure, but I know he'd had like acting training. He was a performer. And from what I understand, again, I haven't delved too much into him and his history, but I think he kind of like he'd been a stage performer and he'd honed his craft and he'd been used to entertaining audiences. And eventually he was kind of snatched up by a studio that kind of was like, here's a contract. We love you. Like, do your thing, but like make movies. So that's what he did. And the Tramp was the character that he was known for, which is just, him doing that shtick, the kind of like lovable goof who was kind of clueless, but just savvy enough to avoid the law or whatever in whatever number of humorous
like
ways.
a comedy of errors.
Always getting caught up in whatever situation or scenario where he is in over his head and stumbling over himself, but always managing to get the upper hand in one way or another. But I think that's what amazed me. I feel like Jackie Chan would fully admit he owes a lot to Chaplin. Jackie Chan's physicality and the humor of Jackie Chan's fight scenes, because so many of them are imbued with a sense of like, they feel more like dances than I think your average fight choreography, which tends to be a little bit more choppy, and his are very, very choreographed and fast, but there's a sense of fluidity and beauty to them. And the way he incorporates humor reminds me so much of Charlie Chaplin. Having seen a few of Chaplin's movies now, you just see his influence on so much. And The Great Dictator, once he brings dialogue into his films, you would expect that to trump him in a way, as like he'd been avoiding it. City Lights was just an outright rebellion against sound films that he thought were going to be a passing fad. And you would think like, well, maybe he was just scared. He wasn't ready to change with the times. And then you see The Great Dictator, and it's like the dialogue is sharp. It's funny. It reminds me of like the Zucker comedies like Airplane and The Naked Gun and things like that. But you see like these people like Mel Brooks and those guys and all these different filmmakers who take that kind of whip smart, zippy punchline comedy. It comes from him. Like, I think it can all boil back down to him. But I think more importantly, what you touched on is something that I think is missing from too many broader comedies, is the sense of humanity and heart.
Yeah.
And some of that I think comes from just the times these movies were being released. Like, this is
Depression, isn't it?
1931.
Okay,
so we're coming out of the Roaring 20s and getting ready to go into like this period of depression and things like that. I'm not a historian. I don't know the exact dates, but he was addressing a lot of that in his work. So there's kind of the Tramp is like, and City Lights perfectly represents this. And I think based on the films I've seen, I can understand why people love it so much and why people hail it as his best work, because it does encapsulate a lot of what the Tramp is. Like, it's kind of a perfect summary of that character, which is like broad humor, slapstick, like, again, very like just funny, like simple, straightforward, but brilliantly executed jokes. Like these are things that like they're so simple, like on paper, that you're like, oh, well, yeah, of course that's funny. He fell over. Or, the scene of him like checking out the statue and just missing this platform that is rising and falling. These are very like simple ideas, but the way they're executed are brilliant. And the comedy, but it's genuinely funny, but it's all at the core of it. There's this sense of like compassion and heart and love. And I think that's what impressed me a lot about City Lights, is the fact that I was not expecting, not to jump immediately to the ending, but the ending caught me so off guard.
Yeah, me too.
Because the film is pretty broadly comedic.
Yeah.
It's not dramatic really
Right.
for the majority. I think the romance is the solid emotional core of the film. Everything else is pretty broad. You got him with the millionaire, which is a great fun relationship, but very like slapstick. And the millionaire is drunk, and they go out and they get drunk together, and they get into all sorts of shenanigans. And then when the millionaire sobers up, he doesn't know who the Tramp is, and the Tramp has to go on his way. But the heart of the film comes from this romance, this relationship with the flower girl, which is just very sweet and sincere, played for laughs, but then it's almost like you didn't expect to be so affected by it. Which I know, I mean, you were in tears at the end.
It was just so tender.
Yeah.
After
what do you think it was that like? How do you think he did that as far as winning the audience over, or winning you over as you were watching, to suddenly get hit with an emotional gut punch like that?
I think it's in the eyes. He has these really like deep, expressive, soulful eyes. Or for me, that's how it felt, where like he didn't have to say anything in those moments. I mean, there's not a lot of speech between the two of them. It's like
There's
a couple
not a
lines.
lot of speech.
Well,
at all.
Sorry. Back that up. But I mean, it's just, and maybe that also is silent film. I mean, you have to really enunciate your emotions and stuff. And I don't know, but he just, I don't know. I don't know if I can explain it, but he did it.
Yeah. Well, that's, I was talking
and
to...
she was wonderful too, that actress. I mean, they played so beautifully off each other.
What her name is.
And that just the moment of recognition where she holds his hand.
Virginia Cheryl? I think is her name. Yes.
But when they touch,
But
and
that-
then there's
but
that
his,
moment.
His almost shyness about it,
Yeah.
like that sheepishness, the look
Yeah.
in his face when she's like, "Oh, it's you," and he kind of like nods, but
Yeah.
he's very
Well,
nervous
it's-
about it
I-
because she doesn't.
She
This
doesn't
is
know
the
what he
first
looks
time
like.
she's seen him for
Yeah.
who he really is.
Yeah, and there's been he has alluded to or let her believe that he's well off, or maybe he has this fancy car, and not necessarily lied, but hasn't corrected it.
Yes, he allowed he allowed it to play out.
Yeah, so when she sees him, and just moments before she's laughing because he's doing stuff for she's like, oh, that's and then she sees him for who he is. It's just a really beautiful moment.
Yeah.
And there's no rejection there, too, which I think is what the audience expects a lot of the time when you maybe see someone that is maybe just a little more like homely or goofy looking or has funny clothes or, whatever.
Yeah, well, he's essentially like a bum.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
And
Fresh out of prison.
yeah, that's true. But she recognizes him and she knows what he did for her, and there's just this deep love there, and it's really beautiful and then it just ends, and you're like, but what happens?
Yeah.
But there's just that really, really like gorgeous moment of happiness between the two of them that they finally found each other.
Did you know, and I'm going to assume you didn't because this is your first time watching the film, and I just found this out myself, but the scene where they meet each other for the first time, just figuring out the blocking for that and how to visually represent how she would mistake him for a millionaire. But when she mistakes him for a millionaire, apparently, I don't know if this is still the case, but it was like the Guinness Book of World Records for number of takes, because Chaplin was pretty harsh as a filmmaker. Like, he was a perfectionist and he would not settle for anything less. So he could be very, very difficult. But in this case, he couldn't figure out how to visually represent, like, how to show the audience that she had confused him with the millionaire who exited the car, and how to make that work. So
Yeah.
he kept returning to it throughout the shoot. And I think overall it was something like over 300 or so
Holy cow.
takes. But eventually he finally settled on, he realized like, oh, the slamming of the car door
Yeah.
and the driving off. And that's how she would recognize, because it's tough to figure out like a blind woman and
Yeah.
a silent film and things like that. But done brilliantly, but it took so much time. It's funny
crazy.
how the simplest things can do that or take that much work. But I think that's what makes it so special. And I think that's what keeps it from, even in the broad moments, it's not like there's mugging for the camera. Like, there's a lot of Chaplin like kind of doing his little thing, but like you said, there's a sweetness to it, there's a sincerity to it. And you love the Tramp because he's not like snarky or sarcastic. He's sweet, he's earnest, and he's very fully embracing of whatever.
Just a little dopey.
He's
you know?
dopey, and he tries to make the best of any situation he's in. But what did you think of the first scene, our introduction to him, but also the the joke about talking pictures?
Yes,
in
you had to
general?
kind of explain it to me because I was just like, what are they doing?
Yeah, the film when it opens is the people, like this big statue unveiling in the city, and the people get up on the city leaders get up on the stage and which was Chaplin's way of not so subtly mocking sound
I
pictures.
think it's hilarious.
It's very, very funny. And the fact that, again, the film, he was really scared about how people were going to receive the film, because we're a few years into talking pictures. There was pressure on him to make a talking picture, and he didn't want to. He was defiantly like, I'm going to make this a silent film. So for him to like take the risk of doing it in general, but
And then
then
poke fun.
but then to open his film with like a very just like funny, it's stupid, isn't it? But how did you feel about the introduction?
I thought it was great.
Was it love at first sight when he's stumbling around those statues?
Yeah,
and-
I'm like a sucker for physical comedy, and he's clearly like the master of it.
Yeah, for sure.
And he just was funny, like climbing all over things, ripping his pants,
Yes,
like
the
flipping
sword
upside
falling
down
on the sword.
Yeah.
But then also he keeps like nodding his hat, and then he there was something else when the national anthem plays?
Yeah, everyone stopped what they were
everyone
doing.
stops what they're doing. They're all very upset at him, and then he escapes, and we have the moment with the statue where he's almost falling into. There's footage on the Criterion channel if you stream that, or if you have the Blu-ray of him rehearsing the scene with the platform moving and stuff. But it's just so funny. There are a lot of there's one, I think it's in Modern Times, where he's like roller skating around, and he keeps skating up to the edge of this, he's on the second floor and there's a giant hole.
Oh,
he keeps
my
skating up
gosh.
to it, and of course it's not real, but there's a lot of stuff of him just narrowly avoiding, and just the way he plays it is so funny. The way he moves his feet, and you think he's going to step backwards, and then he walks forwards, and then you have on top of all of that the gag of the guy coming up and him yelling at the guy, and then he comes up all the way, and the guy is much taller than him. Again, very, very simple stuff, but all done choreographed so brilliantly and simply. And my coworker Dan, when we were talking about Charlie Chaplin and what Dan loves about Charlie Chaplin, it's just a reminder as a film fan or a filmmaker is the beauty and the power of simplicity, because this is not fancy stuff that's happening. It's a lot of just wide shots of action happening within the camera. And, we're used to modern techniques with close-ups and fancy editing and things to kind of create this pizzazz. And here you have a film without dialogue where that is strictly relying on the talents of its performers.
And you have, there are only a couple people in this movie.
Yeah.
Main characters. There's 4.
And they're all great.
Yeah.
I love the Drunken Millionaire.
Yeah.
He's so funny.
He's so good.
And he is the way, when the Tramp is getting drunker and drunker, and again, this just speaks more to Chaplin's brilliance, but the way Chaplin's physicality slowly shifts. I love the way he just completely face plants on the piano, he's and then plants. But the millionaire having to keep up with Charlie Chaplin and being able to match him for physicality is great. And there is it's the sweetness of the story comes from the romance, but there is a really fun bromance going on here between the millionaire
Well, you're
and
also
the Tramp.
talking about, obviously this guy's an alcoholic, right?
Yeah, his
But
wife just
more
left
than
him,
that,
so he's depressed.
He was
and-
suicidal. He was
Yes.
trying to kill himself. So there's some really heavy stuff in this movie
Yeah.
that isn't addressed with heaviness, which is really interesting. Because
Yes.
you're talking about a scene in which he is going to hang himself.
Well, not hang himself. He's going to throw himself off the...
With the news. Yeah. And it's played for laughs, which, tell me the last time that was,
But again, it's the Tramp's good nature where
Yeah.
he's no, don't do it. And then
life is worth living.
again, the brilliance of the noose, the noose is too loose. He tightens it and slips out, and it's around Charlie's neck, and he throws the rock, and it pulls him. Just the way he flings himself off of that.
Well, it's just like a dance. It's they dance the whole movie. Just this really fun comedic dance.
But it feels so... Do you get what I'm saying about it feeling so contemporary? Even though it's
Yes.
clearly not
Yeah.
a contemporary film, the humor works today. It's not something where you have to be now, so obviously the stuff the dialogue at the beginning where where I had to kind of explain this is him poking fun
Right.
at sound pictures. But overall, a child can understand what's going on and laugh at this, but adults can understand, and you don't have to kind of say this is funny because at the time this is happening. The humor still works, holds a candle to any other comedy, and is superior to many comedies, which I think a lot of older films, and especially silent films that are so outside the norm of what a modern day audience expects, to be able to watch a film like this and feel it is worthy of taking on the highest rated, most acclaimed comedies of this day and age is kind of crazy. But did you feel that? Did you feel that the jokes were contemporary, that it was genuinely funny?
For sure. Yeah. I think I laughed the whole movie.
Do you have a favorite laugh that you can remember, or a favorite moment?
Well, the scene where they're at the nightclub is probably my
Yes.
favorite for sure that you were just talking
well,
about.
them pulling off their jackets to fight people. They keep
every
pulling,
2 seconds.
Yes.
And then like when the tramp is like dancing with everyone and then he grabs the waiter and spins him around.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I think that was probably my favorite as far as like the comedic stuff. It's hard to choose. I'd love to watch it again. It's very, very funny.
Every scene is, again, executed to perfection. The jokes are on point. The physicality and the blocking is on point. So it is very, very hard to choose. But it's funny, it's City Lights is considered one of the greatest films, I think rightfully so. But it's like, okay, let's take a step back and try to look at it objectively. And it's like, well, it's basically like, there's a plot. There's the flower girl and the millionaire. But in general, it's kind of like very broad, slapsticky sketch scenes. Like each scene is essentially self-contained. There are characters that overlap, obviously, who recur, and there are situations that are continuous throughout the film, like him with the flower girl, the relationship, and him trying to earn money for her and things like that. But overall, it's like each scene is kind of self-contained, and that's what a lot of his films are like. And it's interesting how that works, like, and how it still kind of flows, because I think if any one of these elements or the execution is wrong, you could feel that a little bit.
Oh yeah,
more.
for sure.
Like you might feel a little bit more like, oh, this is just one.
Well, it
scene
felt
after
very
another.
tight. Like,
Yeah.
It
It's a
felt
short
very,
film.
Yeah, but it felt purposeful, I guess. But I know what you mean, because then it can start to feel like just vignettes or something, like one after the other.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
This just flowed. I don't know if it was like the tether of like the tramp and the flower girl, where it's kind of just interlaced through each story, and there's a driving purpose that maybe kept it together. But
yeah,
it was just so good. I liked this movie.
Yeah, and I also I think it just it comes down to the charm of Charlie Chaplin, his brilliance as a performer, and being able to come up with inventive ideas for each scene. Like, just again, him eating spaghetti and then the string gets caught in his mouth, and then all the stuff with him in the boxing ring.
Yes. Oh,
is
yeah.
So
yeah.
funny. And
So
you were
good.
like, is that how boxing worked in the old days? The ref stood between the two fighters.
I'm such a dummy, guys.
I was like, no, that's sadly not
The olden
how.
days. Sarah's very
if only. But again, and that scene is brilliant. And
well, when they carry the big boxer back in.
oh my gosh, when he's like, the guy's like, here, I recommend using this. These are the things I do to give me good luck, and he's rubbing these all over his body.
And then they carry him back in, and
like,
he's like wiping it off. He's like, no, not the rabbit's foot.
But I also love, again, the guy, he has the plan with, like, they're going to split the thing 50-50, and then that guy leaves.
Yep.
And then the new fighter comes in, and he's, like, making, like, doe eyes at him, and the guy's very creeped out and takes off his pants behind
in
the curtain.
locker.
And then just the way they build up, like, this guy, somebody, like, talks smack to him, and he just knocks the guy out with one punch. And then you go into the ring, and Charlie is just, hiding behind. And it's again, I don't want to say it's simple, because it doesn't look simple, because it's like a dance. Like, he's hiding behind the ref, and the ref is jumping around and moving around, and Chaplin's following those movements perfectly. But then they'll switch places, and the ref will be doing, like, it's just,
a lot of
I
coordination.
imagine it's headache inducing, and it speaks to Chaplin's perfectionism, his talents, and just the insanity of it all. But then, like, the rope getting wrapped around his neck and attached to the bell, and he keeps falling over and then getting up and fighting again. Like, it's just ridiculous, but it's all so funny. And the first time I watched it, I was just very, like, I was very, very entertained. I mean, I'm curious how you felt too, but, like, I was very entertained, touched by the romance, but kind of like, oh, this is sweet and kind of funny, and she doesn't know he's a millionaire. But then, like, again, really, I think this is one of the best endings of any film ever. And I know Chaplin struggled with other movies to reach I think he felt challenged to match this ending, because so many people were so moved by it. Apparently Albert Einstein came to a screening and was, like, emotional, like, the lights came up and was very emotional, and Chaplin was like, he didn't strike me as a emotional person or a sentimental guy. But I think he saw the power of that and the effectiveness of it. But I just remember the first time I watched it just being like, into the film and admiring it on a level of humor. And I'd seen, I think I'd watched The Kid by this point, and I may have watched another short film. So I was used to, and The Kid has some really good, like some very heartfelt moments too. Like it's got its heart in the right place. But I think I was just, because the humor was so broad and so funny throughout, and it doesn't prepare you for the emotional gut punch. I just remember being so stunned by the ending and how powerful it was and how much it got me. But where do you rank this ending in the annals of film endings?
I mean, it's pretty great. It's really great. It definitely got me. I mean, I was like hooked into the movie pretty fast. So it's not like I needed something to reel me in or anything, but I wasn't expecting such a vulnerable moment, that really like got me.
In a film that's, again, it's a comedy, really.
Yeah.
And it's funny because it's like, oh, there's a procedure that cures blindness kind of introduced in the middle of the film.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, yes, and of course. And so it's like just the way that pays off. It's kind of a very silly idea, but then the way they pay it off and make that so tender and make him responsible for that. And just everything he went through for her and that moment of acknowledgement is very powerful. Yeah. Very powerful in a film that, again, comedies don't usually, if they're broader slapstick, they don't fall into the realm of like, oh, and then we're going to hit you with this really powerful moving
that's a
ending.
good point. It's almost like those two things. I don't know if I've seen them together before.
Yeah.
Like slapstick humor and like a really powerful romantic moment.
So
really good.
We're fans of Chaplin.
Yeah.
We want to watch more of his stuff for sure.
Yeah.
You definitely, I mean, you were watching The Great Dictator with me kind of. And
yeah, I was very interested.
Yeah.
And I definitely I need to like do a proper
watch through his stuff. There's plenty to go through.
Yeah.
So
I'm like, where was I? Why was I not watching that? I watched so many old movies.
I mean, me neither. I've never seen it. And I guess maybe because Chaplin, I don't know, not that I've dismissed him, but I think maybe you just think of the silent era and you're kind of like, oh yeah, those movies.
Yeah,
like you don't think of it as like, I respect, like Metropolis, Fritz Lang's Metropolis is one of my favorite films. I think it's stunning. But I think because the Tramp, in my mind, it's like, oh, he's a comedic character, and I never associated Charlie Chaplin with serious filmmaking, quote unquote. I think in the back of my mind, even though I knew he was well respected and that his films were held in high regard, I think maybe there was just that disconnect in the back of my mind.
Yeah, that bubble
made me not like dismissive of him, but kind of like, oh yeah, I'll see those eventually. But I mean, I think these are some of the best cinematic works of all time, without doubt.
Did he go on to, like, what did he do after this?
So
was this his last silent, or did he
after this he continued doing silent films.
Okay.
Let me pull up his film. So after this he did Modern Times, which is great.
Okay.
And that was his last silent
film.
And that's really there's more dialogue in that. Like there are certain areas where dialogue is pronounced. But his character, the Tramp, does not do dialogue. But essentially Modern Times is the last time we see the Tramp character, really, because The Great Dictator has a Tramp-like character, but it's not the Tramp.
Okay.
And that was, I think, his fear is, I think he felt like the Tramp was for the silent era, and once I'm past this, it's done. And I mean, looking at his films, like he really, like Monsieur Verdot, I'm watching that now. I haven't finished it, but that came after The Great Dictator, and it's a very, very different look for Charlie Chaplin as far as it's like a dark comedy, and he's murdering people and it's twisted. And then Limelight, I hear, is really great. And A King in New York, A Countess from Hong Kong. I don't know about those, but I think at this point there was a lot of controversy in his life, and I think people were accusing him of being a communist and all sorts of stuff. So there was just, his star fell pretty hard, and then he kind of, as people were writing about his films and scholars were praising his films and critics were evaluating his films, there was like a resurgence of love for him later on in his life, thankfully. But yeah, I think that's really the only reason I kind of didn't watch, is because I just felt like, oh, it'll be like funny or like slight and fun. I wasn't expecting to be so enthralled and amazed and just captivated by Chaplin and the stories that he tells. But so far, all of them have been excellent. There hasn't been a single one I haven't enjoyed, even of the shorter ones that are like slight. Like there's one, A Dog's Life, I think is what it's called. It's just him and he's best friends with a puppy, and
Aw.
it's great.
I'll watch that one.
Very, very, again, very sweet, very simple, but yeah.
Yeah,
Anything-
I want to watch all of them.
Well, we can. We have access. For any of you out there who do not have the Criterion channel, you can get a 14-day free trial and subscribe. Criterion, send me some Blu-rays, please. That would be really, really nice. But no, I'm so glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah,
And
thanks for sharing
we'll
it
definitely
with
have to
me.
watch more, but we could really just go in order or even just like jump around. A lot of them, like, it's not that they're interchangeable, but a lot of them are very, like, they're usually united by a particular theme. Modern Times is very much about like manufacturing coming in and machines replacing people. But there's like, again, broader slapstick stuff that doesn't necessarily fall in line with that theme. So some of the stuff is quote unquote interchangeable, but they're all great and unique and fun. And they each have a unique style or thing they're trying to communicate. But yeah. Any final words on City Lights? You loved it?
I just feel like I just got a big warm hug.
Yes.
That's how I feel.
And
I
it's
feel
very
very
nice to get
happy and
that every
fuzzy
so
and
often.
yeah.
Especially
really
the
great.
last movie I did on Missing Frames was Raging Bull, which is
Not a warm hug.
not a warm hug. And I think
A
I know
quick punch to the
Raging
face.
Bull is a beloved film that I don't particularly love, but it's a
It's a tough
classic.
film to love.
But a lot of classics, it's like there is that kind of tragic, grimy element to them, and it's nice to go back to great films that are just kind and sincere and warm-hearted, and to remember that it's like it's not about like doesn't have to be tragic or dramatic to be great.
Yeah.
Or to be cinema or whatever. I think sometimes we take ourselves way too seriously.
I struggle to love movies that are very, very dark and sad, and it's not. It doesn't mean anything. It's just, it doesn't like affect
Just a personal thing.
Yeah, it doesn't affect like how great the film is in an objective way. But I have a hard time like
Sure.
gravitating towards that. So Charlie Chaplin.
Yeah, definitely a breath of fresh air. Well, don't watch Monsieur Verdot. Even though it's kind of a comedy, it's definitely a little darker.
I'll skip the murder one.
Yes. But okay, so final ratings. I guess, should we do flowers? How many flowers would you give City Lights?
Sure.
How many?
I would give it 5.
I would give it 5
was really
as
beautiful.
well. Yes. So, all right, we did it. Chaplin is now a favorite. We'll watch more. And I hope everyone out there, if you haven't already been watching Charlie Chaplin films, maybe this will spark your interest. You should. And if you feel your interest has been sparked as far as, Shawn, where can I follow you? Find me on social media, on Twitter at YeShawnDoorman. You can also find me on Letterboxd, which I don't know if that qualifies as social media, but sure, why not? Find me there, ShawnDoorman05. And Sarah, thank you again.
Thank you.
And we will see you at the movies.